Welcome to Macmillan 180. For nearly the past 25 years, students and faculty of the University of British Columbia's Animal Welfare Program have gathered here to share ideas, learn, and enjoy lunch. To celebrate our 25th anniversary, the Animal Welfare Program hosted a series of webinars to virtually invite our diverse alumni to join us once again around the table to ruminate in Room 180. My name is Megan Locke, and I work with the Animal Welfare Program, and I will be the host of today's podcast. On February 6th, we were joined by Geoff, Sara, Christine, and Elisabeth to discuss how to achieve change in the animal protection movement. Geoff Urton obtained his master's from the AWP in 2009 and is currently an educator and certified leadership coach. He applies this knowledge and skills to his work, as well as his training in dialogue from Simon Fraser University and nonprofit leadership from Stanford. He brings 20 years of experience as a strategist and executive in the animal welfare sector to support leaders in caring professions to reach their greatest potential in making a measurable difference in what matters to them. Sara Dubois obtained her master's and PhD from the AWP and is also a registered professional biologist whose main area of expertise is wildlife welfare and human dimensions. She currently works as the Chief Scientific Officer for the BC SPCA and leads 4 teams of experts in animal welfare science and policy. As an adjunct professor in applied biology at UBC, she created a practicum course called APBI 496 for students to get hands-on experience with animals. Christine Subner obtained her PhD from the AWP in 2018 and has worked as a science officer with SPCA New Zealand since, where she advocates for improvements in welfare for animals in the wild, in science, and related contentious topics such as cat management. Christine works with local governments, industry, and other charities to advance animal welfare through research and policy. Elisabeth Ormandy obtained her PhD from the AWP in 2012 and is currently Director of Research at Animal Charity Evaluators, a US-based charity evaluator and effective altruism-focused nonprofit. She is a scientist, educator, and animal advocate who develops and uses evidence-based strategies to improve the lives of animals. When asked about their time with the AWP, Christine and Sara both mentioned the value of diversity in the skills that students develop and the paths that students take.
One of the more important lessons is to get anything done, having a good network of people and knowing how you can work together and how everyone brings different skill sets to a project. And it's been one of the wonderful parts also of, after the program, being still able to work with colleagues I met in the program, quantitative-based animal scientists. We're doing work together. I'm a qualitative researcher in social science, and animal welfare is a field that's booming in terms of how we can work together. And I think there's great need and there's growing demand. So I think one of the more important things I took away from the welfare program, because it is quite tight-knit family, you can have a lot of fun, but you can really bring different complementary skill sets together. And that very much translates to the world outside of academia.
I would say that there's no straight line to where your career is going to lead you. And I think that just because it doesn't exist now doesn't mean it can't exist. So the job description I have now and the 2 previous job descriptions I had didn't exist 20 years ago. So I think that you have to be open to exploring different pathways and not having a straight line to your career and knowing that it actually can change midway too. So like Christine says, you've got all these amazing colleagues and networks that are just expanding. 20 years ago, a lot of people probably came into the program thinking they were going to go on the academia track, but look at where all of the students have landed in different careers in different fields, whether it's nonprofit or industry. So I think you need to just keep your mind very open and explore different pathways.
Our alumni have gone on to undertake unique roles such as veterinary behaviorist, animal lawyer, and animal welfare and milk quality advisor, to name a few. Specifically in the nonprofit sector, there are a variety of paths that our alumni have taken, such as Geoff being an educator and leadership coach. The speakers here today are joining us from Canada, the United States, and even New Zealand, all working to improve the lives of animals in their respective areas. When asked about some recent challenges, Geoff discussed the changes in animal welfare nonprofit organizations over the years and how we might look to the roots of animal advocacy to understand how to continue to improve animal lives.
This sort of humane movement is facing pretty massive practical and paradigmatic challenges right now. And they're not tactical in nature. Sort of sector or movement organizations, humane organizations in, they were the colonies, really, is what it was, colonial institutions, who initiated it during a period of reform in the world, where there was the suffrage movement, slavery freedom, child labor protection started coming in. Our animal welfare sector was sort of forged, and we were social change organizations first and foremost. And then during the modern era after the Second World War, we took on this practical task of taking care of homeless animals, which was an issue that became increasingly prevalent as society urbanized. And then we've been stuck there for about a half a century, and we've forgotten who we really are. And now in Canada, that's probably a $500 million a year annual industry that mostly provides sheltering services for animals. And yet this is the bridge to Elisabeth's work. It's not a particularly efficient way to improve the lives of animals. I think now we're in a new era of social change, and that relates to what we've seen with climate change activism and Black Lives Matter and a host of other issues. The sort of traditional SPCAs and humane societies, I think it's a moment of truth for them to make a choice about whether or not they want to unearth their original roots in social reform, or whether they want to continue with the current MO, which is this sort of service-oriented model, but it will never result in significant, meaningful changes to how people relate to animals in the world.
Animal advocacy and animal welfare science strive for similar outcomes, yet the differences in approach make the relationship between them complex. Elisabeth also described these challenges in her own role, where she objectively evaluates and provides grants for charities by evaluating the impact on animals in several areas.
I love talking about successes, but I'm going to talk about some challenges that I have in my current role. So I lead a research team that evaluates charities for their effectiveness. So that is how impactful are charities programs in terms of animal suffering relieved. And one of the main challenges in my role is the lack of empirical evidence about which animal advocacy interventions are the most effective. So then if we're evaluating one charity that does a corporate commitment campaign and another that does policy work and then another charity that does vegan outreach, then we're tasked with evaluating those charities, assessing their cost effectiveness and recommending the most highly effective charities to donors. So, or at the very least, we have to do these kind of, proxy variables to maintain objectivity in our assessments. So I see that as being not necessarily an animal welfare science challenge, but one for the animal protection movement of if you're going to build out your strategy as a charity, on which interventions do you place your bets? A recent success just from my current role was actually getting through my first evaluation season in this new job. Because of all those challenges, even recommending the charities that we recommended was a gargantuan task. And so that's a real kind of animal charity evaluators focused success. But I'm very proud of my team, and money moved is always a win.
Sara and Christine talked about some successes that they've had in collaborating across different sectors of government, research, and nonprofit, although the speakers also note that more of this type of collaboration is needed in the future.
We've had some really awesome successes in the last few years, and it's because of collaboration. So that's what I say is key. We've been working with other organizations, First Nation representatives, with different government officials. You can go far back as the grizzly bear hunt in 2017. You can go back to mink 2 years ago, and we had rodenticide bans this past year. We've launched Animal Kind and other programs. So I think we've been building on a number of different successes, but we can't do it alone as a single organization.
So here in New Zealand, we've got regional councils, and building relationships in one aspect can lead to opening doors you don't know are there for other issues. So we had gotten word that council was doing a public promotion campaign for responsible pet ownership. And one of the images was to just advocate for folks to not dump their goldfish. The imagery used the classic goldfish bowl, which is woefully substandard housing. And it's like, okay, let's see if we can just find out who's possibly responsible for that imagery and ask them, is there any way? So you think you're going into this bureaucratic machine. And it turns out one of the people we have been working with on all these other issues is the person who could actually do something about it. So we just emailed like, hey, do you know who could help us? And she's like, I can. And it was great. Then they actually asked us, is this okay? And now that image will be changed. And yeah, it seems like a little win, but we think it matters. It helps to have those relationships building and showing you can work together. So when you do have this kind of ask that comes from another direction, it can get accomplished.
There's, been a tradition in our movement of us coming in and telling people how to take care of their animals, how to hunt. We just have a habit of thinking we know everything. And so again, you have to collaborate, you have to expand your mind, you have to look at the animal advocacy movement, you have to look at the conservation biology movement that's running parallel to us. There's a lot of other sectors, animal studies and philosophy, talking about animals and how to make their lives better.
Beyond collaboration, integrating other disciplines with animal welfare has the potential to create even more systemic change. Elisabeth also talked about the role of animal welfare professionals in working to keep animals on the social agenda, potentially by pursuing roles in government or nonprofits. Even if in academia, Christine suggested that researchers should develop policy and communication skills to help them make a wider impact.
The biggest challenge for me will be keeping animals on the political and public and social agenda. There's just so many gargantuan topics that compete for politicians and the public's time and attention and funders' attention and academics' attention. So we've got climate change, pandemics, and war. I don't think that the general public appreciate the intersectionality of those things, perhaps. And wouldn't it be amazing if animal welfare scientists ran for office the way that we've seen climate change scientists run for office, to get their issues on a platform where the agendas that people will vote for? Like, you can have the biggest theory of change, but if you're missing that one influencer, you will not realize your outcomes. And I think that certain people in certain positions at certain times are the things that open doors. So go work for government, run for office, even on your school board. It can be a big influence. And I think that one other big challenge, not necessarily for animal welfare science, more about our ideologies. While we're all navel-gazing about which ethical theory or ideological approach is best, and we're criticizing each other and cutting each other down, animals are suffering. So in terms of the welfare animals actually experience, I think one of the biggest challenges will probably be making sure that the humans who want to help them realize that we're actually all on the same side, and that the animal advocacy movement is going to need everybody and all approaches.
And I heard it once in a talk that your currency is your ability to communicate. If you're trying to achieve bigger systemic change, having a policy background or understanding how do you take your science skills and translate that into policy writing and speaking, it is different. Policy is one of them. Science communication is so needed. I wish I had more of that in my background. And so I think write those animal welfare program research reports. It just gives you an opportunity to just these important skills.
Sara also mentions that this cross-disciplinary focus can happen as early as undergraduate classes, where students pursuing a wide variety of paths could take an animal welfare course to widen their breadth of knowledge.
We need to ensure that people in other disciplines know what animal welfare is. So when they're out in the field, or they are a social worker working with someone who has maybe too many pets and they're concerned about, hoarding tendencies, and how do we get support for this person? So there are so many different sectors that we need to kind of cross-pollinate.
Elisabeth also notes that in order to continue to improve the lives of animals in nonprofit sectors, organizations also need to reflect on their own management practices. Fair compensation will eventually attract and keep animal welfare scientists in their roles.
The nonprofit sector as a whole needs to start investing more deeply in people. I think that it's no good trying to rest on this labor of love mindset and asking people to take lower salaries to work in the nonprofit sector when you're wanting to achieve this big social change. I think that the whole nonprofit sector needs to kind of do more about investing in people, because you can't run your programs without people. We're not just an overhead.
Geoff ultimately sums up the conversation by bringing up the need to think more systemically. This perspective will increase the understanding of the role of animal welfare within other global issues.
My thinking is a little bit more about the nonprofit sector. I think maybe it's thinking a little bit more systemically and working a bit more systemically to consider what impacts or implications there might be of certain practices beyond the suffering of an individual animal. And there's been some great work that the animal welfare program's already done with like integrating with compassionate conservation approach, and there isn't necessarily going to be agreement right away, I think, with those things. But that I think is something that is really compelling to me right now, is where are there certain practices that we would generally think of being within our wheelhouse, say, the dairy industry or something, and what are the implications of some of those practices for other things like worker well-being and equity or climate change, and who are the people who are working on those issues as well, and even just to start hosting conversations just like you did with compassionate conservation. I think there's a lot of potential there.
Thank you for listening to our February podcast on achieving change in the animal protection movement. You can find the Animal Welfare Program on our website at www.awp.landfood.ubc.ca and on our Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter social media channels. Join us next time for an episode on achieving change for wild animals.